probably should say before we get started, this presentation is actually designed not quite for this audience. It's designed really for probably intermediate casters.
That's me.
We're talking to the educated here largely, but a lot of the things that are in here are still relevant to us as we go through our day-to-day instructorial lives as well. If anybody's got any questions, ask them as we go through rather than saving them up to the end, because they'll probably get forgotten to the end. So just interrupt me and ask the questions. So first of all, before we get started too, what I'd like to talk about is what we're doing when we're fly casting, how our casting strokes are made up, what I reckon is the optimum way to make up a casting stroke, and finally just to highlight two common, I call them common constraints that I see in people's casting, things that I reckon stop people's casting getting better. And those two things are early rotation, and the second one is pausing just a little bit too long between strokes, just a little bit. So, what are we trying to do when we're casting? We're actually trying to use the moving fly leg of the unrolling loop to propel or tow our fly to the target. That's basically what we're doing when we're casting. To do this, more often than not, we aim to throw smooth, narrow, controlled loops, which are aerodynamically efficient. In other words, they cut through the air easily. Those smooth, narrow loops are good for accuracy and good for distance. And for success in doing that, we basically have to comply with a set of basic rules that we call the 5 essentials. I like to think about them as drop-dead must-dos. These are the substance of a good back-and-forth casting stroke. Apologies too, Lyle, you've seen all this before.
Yeah, but I really want to come and see the second time, so thank you very much for the opportunity.
And see what changed and anything. So let's have a look at the 5 essentials just quickly. And of course, these were first promulgated by our father and son team, Bill and Joe Gamble in North America. The first one's eliminate slack. Oh, I should say also that these are presented here in around about the order that they appear in a cast. And they're expressed in my words. They're not necessarily precisely the words you'll see if you look in other places. But we're talking about the same things that Bill and Joe Gamble were talking about. So the first one's eliminate slack. And what do we have to do that? Well, if we start with a pile of slack, as we start our cast, all we're doing is removing slack. And in fact, if we have enough slack, we'll run out of cast before we actually get the fly moving and make a cast. So first thing we have to do is get rid of the slack. It's worth probably just keeping in mind too that think about what Lefty Cray used to say to us. Lefty's first principle of fly casting was you have to get the whole line moving before you can make a cast. And he's effectively saying eliminate slack. We need some tension in the line to make a cast. That means we've got to get rid of the slack. So Lefty was on to it. The second of the essentials is we need to accelerate or speed up the rod tip smoothly to a crisp stop. That's one that I've reworded a bit in my words. You'll quite often see that one expressed talking about how much power you apply and where in the stroke you apply it. I think probably for me this explains a little more than expressing it the other way, so I like it this way. Why do we need smooth acceleration? Well, if our acceleration is not smooth, that means we're not applying force evenly to the rod. It means we've got a propensity to throw a tailing loop. So we need to accelerate smoothly, and we want to come to a crisp stop so that we get efficient energy transfer from the rod into the fly line, and also so that we get an effective loop launch. Third of the 5 essentials, we're endeavouring to move the rod tip in a relatively straight line path, and I've added the words in both the vertical and the horizontal planes. You can see if this pointer works now. So we think about the vertical plane. let's say that that wall over there is a vertical plane, so what we're trying to do, I won't point this at anybody, what we're trying to do is we're trying to move the rod tip in a straight line on that vertical plane. If we move it in a line like that, what we're going to get is a wider loop, and if we move it in a line like that, or like that, we're probably going to get a tail loop. And as far as the horizontal plane goes, I was hoping we'd have a ceiling. We haven't got a ceiling, so imagine there's a flat surface going across here, and we're trying to move our rod tip in a straight line like that along this flat surface. If we move it in a line like that, or we move it in a line like that, we're going to get a curved layout. We've actually got a tracking error there, so we need to try and move it. We need to try and move it in a straight line.
Nice, I like that.
Sorry about that, I'll just put it on charge a minute, I need it again. Okay, the fourth of the 5 essentials, we need to be choosing a casting arc appropriate for the length of line being cast, the casting tempo that we're using, and also the stiffness of the rod. Now you guys all know the casting stroke. If we use too wide a casting arc, the chances are we're going to throw a wider loop than we want to, because it means the rod tip's probably not going to go in an entirely straight line. If we use too small a casting arc, the amount of line we've got out, etc., we're probably going to throw a tail in it. You can start to see why all those things are important. And finally, the fifth one is we need a pause appropriate for the length of line being cast and the casting tempo. And of course, you guys all understand the pause is the delay between completing one stroke and starting the next one to allow the loop to unroll. People look at these things and they say, well, you know, how am I ever going to remember all of that? A neat way to remember it, and this one's down to Simon Zarafa. You'll notice here that as we went through, I highlighted the first letter of each one of those in a different colour. So we had E, A, S, C, P. And Simon Zarafa came up with a neat little ditty that used those first letters. It was Eat Another Sugar-Coated Peanut. So if you can remember Eat Another Sugar-Coated Peanut, just take the first letter, and then you have to remember what the first letter meant. So there's still a little bit of learning to be done there. But that's a reasonably succinct way of remembering the 5 essentials. And again, just going back to the pause, if we pause too long, one of the effects of that, apart from possibly snagging up our fly in front of us or behind us or ticking the water in front of us, we're going to lose tension in that loop. And if we lose tension, the gravity will take over, the line starts to sag. When you make the next stroke, effectively with your rod tip going forward, that sag line behind you comes up a hill, and as it tries to align itself with the direction the rod tip's going, it's the momentum, the upward momentum it's got sprays it over the top a bit and opens the loop up a bit. So we don't want to pause too long, and on the other end of the scale, if we drastically don't pause long enough, then we don't get effective rod loading, and again we don't get the tension in the line we're looking for. So let's have a look at how the FFI defines our casting stroke. They've got 2 definitions of it. They're more or less the same, but this one's the shorter one. Fly rod motion sufficient to cause loop formation. So what do we mean when we're talking about fly rod motion? Well, during a normal cast, the fly rod motion we're talking about, it's got 2 main components. The first of those is casting stroke length, sometimes called translation. And this is the distance the rod hand travels during the casting stroke from the start of the stroke to the finish. It's worth noting here that casting stroke length is not related to rotating the rod. It's all about, it's this movement here, linear movement of the hand. Usually, or it should be at the start of the stroke, like so. So I like to think about it, translation is actually the act of moving your hand like that. casting stroke length is the distance that results from that movement. So in this case, it's from about here to here. That's casting stroke length or translation. The second component of the cast is casting arc or rotation. This is the angle of change of the fly rod during the casting stroke from the start of the stroke to the finish of the stop. Again, it's worth noting here that casting arc is not related to translation. It's only related to the angle that we rotate the rod through. And it looks like this. So we've come through, we've made our translation, and then at the finish of the stroke we rotate the rod. And that angle change there, that's the casting arc. So sort of a little bit more of casting stroke length. This is how the FFI define casting stroke length. That's come straight off their website. It's the distance the hand travels during the casting stroke. They've actually shown some rotation at the end of this, but it doesn't affect that distance there. So, why do we need casting stroke length? What's that all about? Main purposes of casting stroke length, this is in my opinion, there are two. One's to provide sufficient room in the stroke to get smooth acceleration of the rod tip and hence the fly line. If you think about it, you can make a relatively short cast, maybe 20-foot cast, pretty much by just doing that, so you don't need much at all. But if you try and cast 60 or 70 feet with that sort of movement, the only way you're going to get the cast to go, you're going to have to hammer it, and of course if you hammer it in that short space, you're probably going to get the tip to dip and rise and you'll get it fail. So we need casting stroke length, and for me it's a critical part of teaching people how to cast smoothly, is using this. The second purpose is to cause the rod to bend in such a way that it loads a bit lower in the blank than would otherwise be the case. Again, if you cast by just rotating, like that, you'll bend the tip over, you'll load the tip. Whereas if you put a little bit of translation in first and then rotate, that load will shift down the blank a bit, and I'll show you a little bit later on. I've got a couple of photos to illustrate that point. Casting stroke length usually increases a bit as the length of line being cast increases. Now let's look a little bit more at casting arc. Again, there's the FFI's definition of casting arc, straight off their website. It's the angle change of the rod during the casting stroke. So why do we need casting arc? I reckon again, there's two main purposes. One of them, and what I haven't put in this for anybody that's interested, I haven't talked about kinetic whipping here anywhere. This is aimed basically at intermediate, so there's no discussion about that. So I reckon that one of the main purposes of casting arc and rotation are to cause the accelerating rod tip to finish fast. We want it travelling at its quickest just before we stop it and the energy transfers into the line. So, of course, to do that, we have to have the rotation at the end of the stroke rather than earlier. And secondly, the second purpose, in my view, is to accommodate the bend in the rod while we're endeavouring to keep the rod tip on a straight line path. And again, casting arc must increase as the length of line being cast increases and or the casting tempo increases. And of course, if you change rods to a much softer rod, you'll have to increase the casting arc to cast the same length of line with a softer rod.
Likewise, if you use a heavier line.
Or use a heavier line, yes.
Yep.
Yep. So, just keep in mind those two elements of the casting stroke, translation and rotation. And what I've tried to do here is I've come up with different ways we can use one or both of those elements to make a casting stroke. And I've come up with 6. And I'm going to tell you that I think one of them is better than the rest of them. So during the casting stroke, we can assemble those two components in a number of ways, and every little illustration I've got on here, you're looking at a cast that's being made from left to right as you look at it. So the first one is we're going to use casting arc only, no casting stroke length, and that simply looks like this. You occasionally see some beginners casting like that. Their interpretation of what they've seen is that, you know, we're casting like that. We call that a pushing stroke, where we push the tip of the rod in front of the butt quite early in the cast. And in fact, in that one, we've done it almost right from the outset of the cast. The rotation begins really early, in that case at the start. And the rod loads up near the tip, which is the thinnest and most flexible part of the rod. For a short cast, you can probably make a cast happily enough like that, but I reckon it'd be a whole lot better just to introduce a little bit of translation before you rotate. It'll just enable you to make the acceleration smoother, and you'll tend to load the rod a little lower in the crank. And if we did that, it'll look like that. We've got a little bit of translation and then rotation. That looks like a little bit of that in there. So the second type of casting stroke that we can get out of those two components, and this one we're only going to use casting stroke length or translation. There's no rotation in this cast. Now, anybody here that's ever tried that, I don't know how you went, but it's bloody hard to make a cast without any rotation. However, with a short length of line you can do it, so the cast actually looks like that. More realistically, it looks like that, to try and get enough energy to make a loop form. The problem with it is, the rod tip will dip and rise and you get a tailing loop. So I reckon we should avoid casting without any rotation.
Do you reckon the FFI would actually accept that as a cast, because there's no casting up involved?
They might, I don't know the answer to that. Yeah.
They argued about that endlessly on section groups, didn't they? I mean, it went on 2 or 3 years while we were trying to nut out the definition.
Yes.
You probably saw that one.
I didn't actually.
Yeah, anyway. It's fun.
So, the third type of cast that we can assemble out of those two components looks like this one, where we've got casting arc first, followed by translation. Now, you might think of a cast like that. You do see that a little bit, particularly in people's back casts when they're not watching them. What tends to happen is they rotate and then they translate. And what that causes is what I call the kiting loop. Has anybody ever heard of a kiting loop before? It's a Gordie Hill expression, and it's basically, does everybody know what a kiting loop looks like? When Gordie Hill used to run his website, one of the questions he asked was, what sort of loop do you get if you rotate first and then translate? And the answer is a kiting loop. It looks like this. So normally the loop we're trying to throw looks like that, where the two legs oppose each other. In the case of a kiting loop, the fly leg doesn't tend to oppose the rod leg, it tends to sit up like that, like we're flying a kite. And as I said, if you watch some people backcasting and they're not paying any attention to their back loops, first thing they do is they rotate and then they shove. And they tend to get a boxy sort of loop. It's got that shape and it might turn over a little bit at the top of there. So it's around that sort of loop. Again, not a sort of loop we generally want to throw, but it does have some uses, as I've said there. You can use it when you're making underpowered curve casts. Lay it down in the horizontal plane, rotate first, translate, and you get a nice 90-degree layout from it. So, that's the third sort of loop. I wouldn't recommend that one to anybody either. And of course it's a pushing stroke because we've rotated really early in the cast. And I'll talk a little bit more about pushing and pulling in a moment. So the fourth type of loop that we can throw, assembling these two components, is one where we can combine the casting stroke length or the translation and the rotation all the way through the cast. Now, I reckon this one's not uncommon, you know, there's a lot of people cast like this. And it looks like that. So in reality, what it looks like is you start rotating at the start, and it generally comes from people who pivot their elbow. You get a casting stroke where your hands actually move there, but all the way through the rod's rotating as well.
The other place I see that a lot, well, if I may, is those self-taught casters who you have read that they've got to keep their wrist locked throughout the stroke, and they get back to here, and they can't but come forward like so, because they don't loosen their wrist and drag. And I see that a lot in guys who are self-taught and then want to cast further, and tailing loops are always going to be the result.
And unlike it, but I see it a lot in the people I teach, you know, it's a common way of casting doing this. It will produce a cast, but the loop very often is wider than desired because of the fact that we've been rotating all the way through the cast. So it becomes harder for them to keep the tip travelling in a straight line.
The ones I see, I think, must be misapplying their acceleration because they've lost all of this stroke here. It's almost creeping. You know, they get to this point here and they've got to whack it to make it out. But they're trying to take their cast from 40 to 50 feet out to 60 to 70. You'd see a bit of that in WA ground, the saltwater guys. And they get to here, this point, the rod's vertical, and then it's whack. You know, it's a punch. So.
The ones I've seen, and I guess I'm probably talking about people who just learnt to cast, they're not getting the maximum tip speed just before the stop that they could get because they're using up some of the rotation early in the cast. And of course, you know, maximum, our best contributor to tip speed is when we rotate the rod. So if you're spreading that over a big space, you're not going to get the end result that you were looking for. Again, in this case, rotation begins early, in fact right at the start, so it's a pushing stroke. What are we up to? The fifth type of stroke you can get, and this is the one that I think we all should be aspiring to, is where we have casting stroke length first, or translation first, followed by rotation at the end, and it looks like that. In Peter Hayes speak, this is backslash, 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 forward slash. And in this case, because we rotate right at the end, we don't rotate early, we call this a pulling or slinging stroke. In this case, the cast begins with the rod butt leading into the stroke, so the actual cast looks something like that. So we pull first, and then we turn it over at the end. And you'll see as we go a fair way through the stroke, the rod butt is leading into the cast, the tip staying behind the butt until right at the end. Rotation's late in this case.
Has anybody found an effective way to get a beginner to do that?
Sorry?
Has anybody found an effective way to put that into words so a beginner will always lead with the butt?
Yeah, I tell them to think about slinging. Slinging seems to be a word that registers with some people where you do that, you know.
For my 2 cents, a soft hand and throw it down.
Yep, and that's a very good analogy for it, I reckon.
And the pickup and lay down cast too, I mean, if you're talking beginner, this happened here.
Hammering in the elbow.
When you're looking down on it,
That's what you
Just lay it on
That's the head first.
like that.
I still find it
Hit first.
usually,
but if you're doing it for beginner, you've only got, you know,
Soften the hand.
yeah,
Don't let them grip.
Yeah.
You can't rotate that.
So the butt has to come first when you do that, doesn't it?
so the question was beginner, so more intermediate casters, yeah, absolutely. And then the lay it on the ground, drag, pop. Or do the 2 sticks on the ground, with midnight here, drag, hand gets to midnight, pop it. So,
I've tried words like lead with the butt, leave the tip behind, open up that arc in there as you come forward, open it up, point the rod back, point down, keep it pointing out as long as you can, then move it.
fun, isn't it?
Chip fires, the grips, chip fires, the grips, one of the little expressions we use to describe this, until right at the end. So rotation's late, this type of stroke tends to load the rod lower in the blank, and more towards the butt, which is thicker and less flexible than up at the tip. Rod loads can be higher using this stroke, and I've made a statement there to say that the line tension can be up to 2.5 times higher than you get with a pushing stroke. Now, I know somebody's going to ask me later where do I get that figure from. I'll talk about it shortly. And that's pretty significant, actually. If our rod loading and unloading is a bit less than smooth, our propensity to throw a tailing loop is a bit lower using this pulling stroke than the pushing stroke, because we're not bouncing the tip around as much. So if we suddenly unload the rod part of the way through the stroke, yeah, the tip will come up. But because the tip isn't bent over anywhere near as far as it is with a pushing stroke, the chances of getting a tail are a bit lower. I reckon it's the ideal stroke for the majority of casts, including roll casts. It's the ideal stroke when you're casting into a headwind. You're going to notice I'm going to ask you in a moment why. It's the ideal stroke for very flexible rods, such as cable. And that brings us finally to the last combination I came up with, and it's really not a new combination. This is just a little hybrid of what we just talked about. And in this case, we again start with casting stroke length or translation, but right at the end when we rotate, we've still got a little bit of translation happening there. So we translate, and then as we rotate, we still translate a little further. And I reckon in practice, no matter how hard we try to get rotation right at the end, this is more like what happens. And this is still a pretty good stroke. So rotation again here is predominantly late. So it's a pulling stroke. So I'll talk a lot about pushing and pulling. Let's just compare the two types of casting, pros and cons. So I reckon, this is my view, it's the optimum, pulling is the optimum casting stroke for most occasions. When I say most, I can think of one where you may choose not to, and that's that one where you rotate, translate to get an underpowered curve cast. But in most cases, I reckon we're far better off pulling the stroke than pushing it. You get, then why is that? We get smoother acceleration to the rod tip and line, because we've got more space basically to accelerate smoothly. We get higher line tension than a push stroke, and we're up to 2.5 times higher. There it is again. I will talk about it a bit more in a minute. It's a much better casting stroke when we're casting into a headwind. Anyone got any thoughts about why?
Because it can give you a nice narrow loop.
Get the line
well,
straight.
Because you've got your straight line path for a long time
Yeah.
without much.
I reckon the obvious answer is the previous line, that one there. What's happening when you're casting into a headwind is that the wind's slowing your cast down, and it's reducing tension in the loop. So if you start with more tension in the loop, your chances of trying to do some cast are better than if you start with the tension lower. And I'd urge everybody to try it, and I've done it, and wow, you know, the result is extraordinary. If you really pull into a headwind, the cast goes.
Aren't you going to get a good load when you're passing into
You
the
do,
wind?
yes you do, and the load translates into the line tension basically. You get less bend in the rod tip than you do with a push stroke for the same rod loading, and therefore, as I said before, there's a lower propensity to form a tailing loop if you're a little bit lumpy in the way you load and unload it. It's a much better stroke for a more flexible rod, I reckon. So how do we make a pulling cast? It's not that difficult actually. You begin with casting stroke length or translation, and I reckon there's two ways you get that. First way is use your body. You start your cast with your body. So let's imagine I've just made a back cast back here. I've got my weight on my back leg. So that when the loop's just about unrolled, I start to make the forward cast. The first movement is transfer the body weight, and you can see what's happening here. I'm getting the first bit of translation, and I'm not doing anything other than just transferring the body weight. So we go to there, and then we keep that going with more translation by the movement of the arm, and then finish with rotation. That's a pulling stroke, and it's no more complicated than that. The problem a lot of people have got, and Peter talked about it before, is people have got used to casting like this, and changing a casting stroke from that to that, for a lot of people is quite a hell of a task. But that's the way you make a pulling stroke. And again, we use that expression, the tip fires the grip, as Graham was referring to before, as a way to remind ourselves about pull first, then rotate.
Tony's point about soft hands.
Yeah.
You know, if your hands are tight, you're gonna rotate.
Yeah.
And you really soften that. But Hazy does that, and he
It's
gets it,
it's
squeeze.
ridiculous extent. The rod's gotta be falling, I think, yeah.
Yeah. And then, Tony, I've seen you actually throw a whole fly line off the grass, just by doing that, over a bench. I would have marked you down a bit on the size of your loop, but
No respect.
one cautionary note about rotation at the end of the cast is don't overdo it. We need rotation, but we only need a bit of it. We don't need gobfuls of it. Rotation which is too aggressive will result in a tailing loop. It's a very common casting fault. Everybody here, I'll guarantee, has seen it. And particularly on the delivery shot, last cast syndrome, everybody grits the teeth and really goes for it on that last one. They go whack, and we get a tail. And the other thing I reckon people should be doing is when we're practicing late rotation, I reckon particularly on the backstroke does require a bit of practice. We should monitor this angle change that's going on here between the rod butt and our forearm. And I'll stick my neck out here. I reckon for most casts you don't need more than about 30 degrees of rotation there, even for a really long cast. And I know there's going to be some people who will disagree with that. The point I'm really trying to make is there's no magic about the number of 30. It can be 35, it can be 25 for individuals, and they'll do it fine. Some people probably might even manage it with more than that, but it shouldn't be 90 degrees. We don't need to rotate that much. So if you're trying to teach yourself to throw nice, narrow, smooth, controlled loops over, particularly over any sort of distance, just monitor that rod angle and work on not overdoing it.
One of my ways of teaching that, if I may,
Yep, sure.
is I actually film that gap. So my teaching, I'd have that orange mark.
Yep.
And I film that gap and show them what the wrist is actually doing.
Yep.
And I call a tempo to it where it goes open, shut. You know, it's like sort of like a switch.
Yep.
Opens up here and then it shuts there. And that works well for teaching.
In fact, I also video people and they're quite often amazed at how much this is happening when they don't reckon it is, but as soon as you see it on the video, it doesn't bother.
You can't see it at the tip.
No,
It's all too fast.
just down here you can.
It's also actually interesting to make them watch that
Yeah.
Yep.
and then video their work and show them
What happens
change
in the loop?
When you're doing that, just concentrate on that.
So let's have a little bit of a look at how the rod bends for a pushing stroke first and then a pulling stroke. So here's a pushing stroke first. In this photo, that's a 9 foot 6 weight stage 1 rod. And you can see there, I've used a pushing stroke. I made that stroke by just doing that as hard as I could. You'll see that the majority of the bend in the rod is up in that area there, up near the tip. Yeah, there's still some bend down here, but the bulk of it is in that area up there. So it's bent up near the tip. You'll see here that the rod butt already is starting to just start to point behind me when I'm making the cast. So it's quite early in the cast. I've turned that over and I've got the butt starting to point back this way. And you'll also note down here that there's no weight transfer much going on at all. I've got nearly all my weight on the back foot there. My front foot there is just really stopping me from falling over. But most of the weight is on the back foot. I'll talk about that 2.5 times line tension with the next photo. So that's a pushing stroke. Now let's look at the same thing for a pulling stroke. Same rod. And this time I've pulled the stroke, and you can see that the way the rod's bent, it's overall the rod's not bent as much as it was with the pushing stroke. And again, in both of those cases, I've tried to bend the rod as much as I could. You'll see here that now most of the bend is in this part of the rod, around about the middle of the rod. So the bend is actually moved down the rod blank more towards the butt. It's not got right down to the butt, it's not bent down here, but it's somewhere in this middle section of the rod that most of the bend is. You'll note here that even at this stage in the stroke, the rod butt is still leading into that casting stroke. Well and truly, it's nowhere near pointing down or behind me. You'll see also that there's fairly obviously some weight shift happening there. I've got a lot of weight on my front leg there, and there's still some weight on the back leg, but it's just getting to the point where the back leg's not doing much except stopping me fall over. The other thing is this business of the line tension, and in that stroke there, the line tension was 2.5 times what it was in the previous photo. How do I know that? Out of the picture here, there's a fence. And on the end of the fly line, we tied a spring balance, and then tied the spring balance to the fence. And as I made each of those strokes, Val read the spring balance, and the ratio of the readings on the spring balance, these were 2.5 times higher, as a minimum, than were the ones where I pushed the stroke. They weren't all the same readings. Some of the ratios were a lot higher than 2.5 times, but I've just been conservative here and picked the low one. And boy, if I can make a stroke that gives me 2.5 times the line tension only by the way I make the stroke, I'm going to do it every time.
So it's interesting that you get pretty similar results when you demonstrate rod bending fighting fish.
That's where I got the idea, Pete. I thought he was
This is remarkably little.
Well, if you had the line anchored to the fence and the spring balance, if that line wasn't anchored, then do you think were you still getting 2.5 times the tension?
Don't know.
Because I know we do that test that we anchor it to a fence. Now we've got a force, but if that's not anchored, that line just moves.
What I can tell you is that by subjective feel when I'm making a cast man is I can feel a lot more tension in the line making that sort of cast than making the previous one. Whether it's 2.5 times, I don't know.
The line or the rod? What do you feel? Reckon you feel the tension?
I'm feeling the line. I'm feeling the rod too, obviously, but I can tell how hard that line's pulling. And you know, it's by you doing it a lot, I guess.
I think at a beginner's level, this anchor here is probably going to work for them to get the idea of what that tension means.
I'm just trying to sell the message whether I'm fudging a bit or not.
Oh no, I don't. You know, I'm saying if people go away and go, oh no, it's 2.5 times the tension, and then people start quoting numbers. Yeah. Well,
some of the readings we got here, the ratio was 6.
Yeah.
So it does vary all over the place. I just picked the lowest number we got, which was the ratio of 2.5.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying is that's not set in stone. So,
No, it's not.
for instance, you know, the rod's, I used to get the rod's 80% labour. Every rod's 80% labour?
I don't know. But what I could put my hand on my heart and say in answer to that question is, I know by the feel of it that I get more tension in the line when I pull the cast than when I push it. So just to summarise, pushing and pulling, a common casting constraint I reckon that I see a lot is people rotate too early so they push the cast and they don't, for all the reasons that I've just outlined sort of in the previous few slides, they're not optimising what they're getting out of the casting stroke. I reckon they could do better if they use a casting stroke like that. So,
I know Graham and I both know a caster who would send this room of instructors into a fit X-ray cast, where he rotates right through and then does a lot of wonderful casts, loops like this. And, you know what I'm talking about.
And the side looks like it's got a needle in it as well.
and I guess the other thing about this is that there's no absolutely right and wrong way to do it.
He's the only one I've ever seen who can really get away with it.
There's a guy called Doug Swisher who he casts almost exclusively from his wrist, but he over a long period of casting like this. But for the average Joe, I reckon if you can get him casting with a pulling stroke, their casting line's going to be a lot easier. So another common casting issue I see, this is the second one, is, and this is apart from rotating too early or too aggressively, is pausing a little bit too long before commencing the next stroke. And I reckon this is pretty common, by the way. I reckon more than half of casters, probably a lot more than half of casters, pause a bit too long in my view. So what happens is they get a bit of a loss of tension in the loop. Gravity takes over, gets hold of the line starts to sag. And the next loop is inevitably a bit larger than they were intending it to be. I commented on that earlier. So what we're talking about there is, what's the timing we should have? Well, for me, and I bet we get a lot of different answers if you ask a lot of different people this question. When should you actually make the decision to start making your next stroke? For me, it's like something like a couple of feet of fly line still up in the top leg of the loop. And the only way you really know that for sure is to watch it. I'm not counting the leader there. I'm talking about the fly line. So that's the point at which I would make a decision to make the next stroke. By the time that message gets transmitted and the muscles react and I start moving the rod, some of that line there will have straightened out. But for me, ideally, I'd still like a little curl of line going around the nose of the loop as I start to move forward. And I move forward, if I'm doing it as I've been preaching here, I'm dragging for a start. I'm starting to move forward with translation. So one of the things I'm trying to do there is I'm trying to pull that last bit of line around the corner of the loop, keeping in touch with the tension in the line. What that means is I don't lose tension. Well, I'll probably lose some as it slows down, but I don't lose all the tension in the line. Whereas if you let it completely straighten out, at that point it's going to lose tension and gravity will start to take over. What the sagging line looks like is we've let it completely straighten out and the line looks something like that. And gravity's got hold of this and it's falling down. So I look at that and I think, right, it's time to make the next stroke. So I start moving the rod tip in that direction there. But this line that's here, it's wanting to head up that way, and it has, as I start to move this, it has some momentum up that way. And as it comes over the top, it tends to spray over like that, and we open the loop up a bit. So this contributes to your loop being wider than you were desiring it to be. So, how do we fix that? It's pretty simple, don't pause quite as long. And for me again, it's watching for that 2 foot of ish line still in the top. I don't think there's any magic about 2 feet, by the way. For different people it'll be different amounts, but it's somewhere around that. There's a little bit of fly line still in the fly leg. That's the point at which you make the decision to start your next stroke, not when the thing's fully straightened out. And keep in touch with the tension in the line as it goes around the nose of the loop. As I said, to start the dragging process when that's going on. One thing you can do is watch where the loops go past you when you're fox casting and practicing. Now you think about it, if you're standing, this is only half a rod, but if you're standing making casts here, if the rest of that rod was there, the tip of that rod isn't bent over, will be probably 6 or 7 feet above my head. So that's where the rod leg is going to be at that point in the cast. Ideally the fly leg is maybe a little bit above it. So the loops should be going by, if you've got it dead right, 6 or 7 feet above your head, but you'll commonly see them coming past here or here.
You see it actually going that
Or,
way.
yeah, or down here.
Is that the one where it goes,
Not like that.
Yep,
goes up just in front of you? You're too slow?
yep, you've forced it.
Goes,
Yeah. So, just monitor where the loops go past you when you're casting, and if they're coming by down here somewhere, shorten your pause a fraction and I'll guarantee you they'll probably go up, they'll come by higher up. And what you're doing there is you're simply keeping the things lined up in a straight line, rather than letting them sag and then up and then flatten off and so on.
Yeah, it's interesting to see Mark Hugh with his two-hander or his overhead cast, they all click,
Yep,
you know?
yep.
He's coming forward, so what does he say that when the fly's going?
As the fly goes past you this way, you start going that way.
Yep.
And because of the mass of the line and the length of excuse me, the cast onto those two handles. Is that right?
There's a Kiwi guide who fishing a single-handed rod, he says exactly the same thing. The right timing is as the fly goes past your head in the other direction. So that's the second of these common things that I said. I reckon the majority of people pause just a fraction too long, and they're losing tension by doing this. So just to finish up, I just thought I'd throw in a few other tips for good casting. First one's don't overpower the cast, particularly including the delivery cast. Listen to your rod. If you can hear the rod going swoosh, 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 back off. You know, you've got too much energy going into the cast.
Or you're not, or the rod, it's whooshing because the rod's not pulling the line. It pulls the line, the rod slows down.
Usually if you're whooshing, you're going too hard. Slow down until the rod's gone quiet. Always be smooth, and that's quite easy to say and a bit harder to do. But I reckon using what I call body rock or weight transfer is a fantastic way to get somebody to smooth up their casting. It's just get them to do this a bit. It adds a little bit of translation into their cast. I like to think about that as free smoothness, and it's quite remarkable the effect it has. If you've got somebody who's casting and their loops are a bit lumpy and so on, get them to rock their body and it'll smooth out. Probably. Watch your loops, including your back loops, whenever you can while you're practicing. I'm not promoting that people will necessarily have to watch their back loops while they're fishing. If you're fishing for saltwater fish, you'll be watching the fish. But while you're practicing, you should be watching your back loops. Anybody got any thoughts about why we want to watch our loops?
Everyone else is.
Like what we should. Why do we?
The difference between a watch loop and an unwatched loop is huge.
Yep, you can see.
Can't fix what you can't see.
I think it's a perception thing, like people actually think they're doing something and you can tell them that they're not and they need to change, but until they actually see it, they don't believe it.
What Tony says right, it's you can't fix what you can't see. So if you want, we're trying to get feedback on basically what our loops are looking like, and therefore what we're doing that's causing them to look the way they're looking. And if we're not watching them, we haven't got a clue. So we should, while we're practicing, we should be watching. I've had people say to me, I go fishing every weekend, so I'm practicing every week. But when they're fishing, they're not practicing casting, they're practicing catching fish, and particularly practicing trying to get a fish to eat a fly. So, if you want your casting to get better, practice it separately from fishing. For narrow loops, stop the rod tip high, or put it in another way, don't use too much casting arc. And again, we know that the casting arc is going to vary according to the length of line. So if you've got a really long length of line, the rod tip will be lower. But you'll see a lot of people, you guys all do see it, I'm sure, they're casting 30 feet of line and they're using, the rod tip stopping down here, particularly on the delivery stroke, tends to happen a lot. Lift the rod tip a little bit at the end of each casting stroke, sometimes called stabbing. If you think about what a casting stroke looks like, we're trying to move the tip in a straight line through here, but if people go further, you get to a point where unless you do something else, the further movement, the tip's starting to drop. The white light's going back this way, and if I keep going back, the tip drops. So we actually get a tip path. There's the straight line path that we were trying to get at each end, and look like that. So either bring your casting arc back to there, or offset these bits by just, as you're delivering, just lift and stab a bit at each end of the stroke. That's one that a lot of intermediate casters find it a little bit hard to come to grips with now. Think about throwing the back cast up, and I'm talking about thinking about throwing it up. Sort of quite remarkable the effect it has. If you've got people that are they're bringing their rod tip over to here on the back cast and throwing the loop down, you just tell them to think about throwing it up. Even if the loop doesn't go up, it almost always levels up, just by thinking about it. Squeeze each casting stroke with a stop and then relax the grip, which avoids those wrinkles we sometimes see in the rod leg. And a little saying to remind ourselves about that is don't crush the corks. What we're doing there basically is we're managing counterflex and rebound in the casting And the final tip for good casting is practice, apart from when you're fishing. If you want to get better at it, you've got to go away and practice it and practice it. That's it.
How do we get them to practice?
That's a really tough thing.
It's a really,
Have a fun.
convince them that there's something in it for them.
Yeah.
So you're casting up, saying no more than 90 degrees, but you watch the championship class and they're doing 190 degrees.
I know.
How do you,
I'm
when you
just-
get a question like that from the intermediate, how do you deal with it?
I just say, those blokes, they've done their practice basically, but they know how to manage it. In fact, when you're doing 170-degree cast, you know, you're opening that rod tip right up.
Paul says he hits the ground.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's.
I know that's the case. Bear in mind, the audience here is people that are trying to get to improve their casting.
Yeah, so
And one way is to get that casting arc under control.
the question is, how do you deal with it when
Yeah,
the question comes?
I just say that.
Well,
those
it's
guys
just an
done the
extension
practice,
of the-
They know how to manage it.
It's just an extension of that pull through, really. Instead of going pull, 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 rotate, it's like pull, 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 rotate, and then pull, 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 rotate. It's the same style, just at the extreme.
Bob, on YouTube recently, I watched a lot of Steve Rajeff casting.
Yeah.
Steve Rajeff tells everyone to rotate throughout the stroke.
I know, I saw that same
Yeah.
thing.
And so when you get someone that is an intermediate caster that goes, well, hang on, I saw the 13-time world champion say this, but you're telling me different. What do you do then?
I say, I trust me, I'm from the government. No, if you have, what I say to them, it's a good point there, because I saw the same video and I thought, wow, you know, he's not talking about what I'd be talking about. But when you watch the video, I don't reckon he does what he says he does.
I bet you he's doing something different to what he
Yeah,
says.
and I don't reckon he does rotate all the way through the cast. He rotates, in my view, in the last half of the cast. So, going back to those 6 types of casts, I reckon he had a form of number 6, where there was still some translation happening and some rotation.
Had this, you know, I think in my head, what I think it is to put that bend in the rod. He's not rotating like this. He's just squeezing that cork a bit. He's thinking about rotating as he's translating. You get tension, get that thing locked up, and then he can whack it.
Yeah.
But he's not coming forward like this, and then at the end.
No, he's not doing that.
So
In that same video, he did demonstrate too much rotation at the end as well, which I thought was really good because when he went whack, you could see.
tailing tendency
Yeah.
in the cast, because he
Just-
said everyone else is taught to come right at the end, and the last thing you do is rotate. So he said if you save it all up for the end, yeah, you get
There's
this.
probably something in between that and what he was
I
saying he was
reckon he's
doing.
got that hybrid stroke where it's a certain degree of pulling going on, and then this bit's, it's partly what he says, but I watched it carefully because I thought, wow, you know, that's not what I go around telling people. And I reckon he's not rotating right through the stroke despite the fact he says he is. He might feel like he is, but the actual tip is not reflecting that.
And the other thing like this casting up, when we tell people at the end to rotate the rod, you know, do we tell them to push with their thumb to rotate the rod? Do we tell them to squeeze their fingers in to rotate the rod? You know, I think Rajeff is squeezing his fingers. I think he's doing this. He's not doing that to rotate.
You watch the rod tip as he does the first half of the stroke. The tip's not doing that.
And I explain that to like, if you're sitting in a car and you jump on the accelerator, what happens to your head? It goes back in the seat. So even if you pour the power on this hand and rotate, you do it strong enough, you're leaving that tip behind all the time. So you know what I mean? The only time your head comes off the seat is if you back the power.
On his delivery cast, he makes some big adjustments at the back there. You know, he drops it way back and lifts it. You know, this.
Yeah, he has to.
And he's from there, he's got a drag. Yeah, big changes on the delivery cast.
Because I remember watching that video with all those instructors, they're like, what? You rotate through the stroke? No.
Yeah.
You reckon he wants to keep winning, mate?
I think so.
And then there's the Dutch guy, who won the trout fly a few years ago, who rotates and really finishes with huge thrust. Yeah. And that's our mate Steve. Bradbury. Yeah, rotates through here, it looks like a creep, I mean, as an instructor, you go, Jesus. And then,
As an instructor, you look at the rules and say, no, it can't work. You just keep going.
That man's point about
yeah,
the head going back and so on, if you get somebody to hold a sheet of paper just here in front of their face, place a rod tip sort of an inch off the paper on the other side, and get somebody to make a cast, a really violent cast going away from that bit of paper, the rod tip comes back and goes smack onto the paper, even though you've moved the rod that way, tip goes that way. It's quite interesting.
There's a physics reason why that tension, like you're saying, just before it reaches the end of the line and it starts to sag, the tension in the rod leg is usually held there because the fly leg's moving through the leg, pulling the rod. If you're not moving the tip at all, then it's the line moving through the air that's pulling the rod leg straight. As the fly leg enters, as the loop goes into the taper, there's less mass being pulled into that loop, so that's when you start to lose it, because the mass of the tape, the fly leg itself is getting thinner, so it starts to drop, it's pull on the rod, and that's what it starts to say. So that's why that 3 or 4 feet is there, because most lines have a 6 foot taper. That's when it starts to happen.
Well, I see that a lot of distance casting from people giving the ball back too soon. That's what I see it from. There's people haul down here like this and they give it back straight away. So you're just putting slack back in and you take the tension off the rod. And then you get this. That's what I see.
You can compensate when the tip is
That's it, mate.
I'm actually mentoring a guy who's just started on the NCI gym, and so it's just got his CI, and he's one of those guys who comes back, stops, pauses the loop, I mean, he's throws really nice loops, but they all start to sag, and I got him to just shorten that pause a little bit, and he's gobsmacked about the change in the feel of the cast, just because you can feel the tension staying in the line more through the cast, and tension, loss of tension, retention, get it back.
So, could you quote me that section that relates to the pull?
Well, I reckon it's about the way, for me, it's about the way we accelerate.
You said there must be a pause to allow the line to do something.
Oh, pause?
Yeah.
What
was the reading?
How did I express it? It's the fifth one, anyway.
I can't remember your words, but I have a problem with that.
Yeah.
I agree with what you're saying, in terms of line tension, etc., and the timing. I think Bill and J. Gamble's words say to allow the line to straight.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I said those are in my words.
I couldn't remember your words.
Yeah, I've expressed my.
Okay.
I didn't like I don't like the way they express the business about the acceleration. The way they express it is it's about how much power you apply and at what stage in the cast you apply. That's correct, but it doesn't tell you much. You know, you just there's an unanswered question in there. So I think it's better to be a little more straightforward about it.
Yeah.
We'll see if I can find it quickly for the time.
Yeah, just see what that says again. In relation to what you were saying recently.
As you can see, they're sadly wanting. There we go.
Excellent.
As I said before, they're my words, they're not Bill and Jay Gamble's words exactly. I put them in the way I like them, sort of, rather than the way they said it. Okay.
Got one more for you, Dave. I just want to throw one more casting strap. So this pull. So that. What do you think of that? So basically all the ones you showed are
Yeah, I'll show them all horizontally.
that,
compared to that. And, I would say that all that for me is there's a little bit of translation going on at the end of the rotation. And if I'm trying to teach somebody, I reckon that works. Peter Hayes calls that the forward loading movement. And for me, it's a really good forward stroke, but then trying to get people to relate to that same thing going backwards doesn't quite work. So in my mind, I've tried to level the whole process up so that what you do going this way and what you do going this way, you can describe them in the same way. That makes sense? I've got no problem with that at all. That's this sort of stroke. Coming down as you rotate at the finish gives a really good stroke. But try and do that going backwards.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
You should. Everybody should.
Yeah, it's interesting that we draw that stroke on the slash rotate.
Yeah.
And if it's on a horizontal line, I'm nearly guaranteed I'll get the tail work, I think, because I'll push with their thumb to rotate and put the bend up the top of the rod. Whereas if you come in like this, and then when you rotate the rod, instead of this butt being fixed and going in that direction, you pull it back like this, it'll never tail. And the same going back. Bang, bang, bang. And instead of coming to here and then rotating, if you come to here and send the butt of the rod back this way, wipe the bend out of the rod.
I know we like ask myself, I do that.
Yeah, no. But we draw it as this.
Yeah. It's about trying to get people to understand fundamentally what's going on there. I think if you make it too complicated, but
Oh, yeah, can't do it.
it
In
can't
this
be.
room, you got a chat.
Yeah, and as I said at the start, this talk is really aimed at me. It's not aimed at Chris.
Yeah, I hear all of that, but I mean, if I get someone that comes to me that's an engineer, I'm like, mate, you should be putting up this way. I can't just, mate, do this, that. Tail and lever it, all right, now do this, and then pull that down and do that. That's Morsey, there's a book that I've just got that you have. It's a really good book, little thin book written by two guys, and they have a lot of diagrams of how the rod moves. As soon as I look at that, I'm like,
Yeah, the yellow cover.
yeah.
The yellow.
Look at the yellow book of castings.
Charles Ritz's book, that what is it? High line, high speed cars. All he did was had a diagram of the rod being bent. This is the path on what the artist. Yeah. Not